The steel beam groaned under her weight as Agent Emily Vance rappelled through the rusted skylight into the abandoned warehouse. Her tactical boots hit concrete with barely a whisper. In the shadows below, a small voice whimpered, "Help me. Please, help me." The sound cut through the darkness like a blade through silk. Emily's heart hammered against her ribs as she spotted him. A boy, no more than 8 years old, tied to a chair in the center of the warehouse floor. Blood trickled from a cut on his forehead, his dark eyes wide with terror and desperate hope. But what Emily didn't know was that this wasn't just any kidnapped child. This was the son and heir of Lorenzo Moretti, the most powerful Mafia boss in New York. And what happened in the next 20 minutes would change both their lives forever. Stay with me until the end, because this story will shock you to the core and prove that sometimes the most dangerous missions lead to the most unexpected destinations. Before we begin, don't forget to like this video, hit subscribe and comment where you're watching from. Now, let's get into it. It's a rain-soaked Thursday night in the industrial district of Brooklyn, 2024. The GPS tracker had led CIA operative Emily Vance to this exact location after 3 days of hunting the Crimson Wolves, a rival gang stupid enough to target civilians for leverage. This wasn't Emily's usual assignment. She specialized in deep cover operations, infiltrating criminal organizations from the inside. But when a child's life hung in the balance, protocols became suggestions. Emily had been tracking organized crime in New York for 7 years. She spoke fluent Italian, Russian, and Spanish. She could pick locks, disable security systems, and disappear into crowds like smoke. At 32, she had successfully penetrated 4 major criminal networks, gathering evidence that put 67 high-profile criminals behind bars. Her handler called her the Ghost. Targets called her a myth. But tonight, suspended 40 feet above a concrete floor, Emily was just a woman racing against time to save a child. The warehouse stretched across 2 city blocks, its windows boarded up, its loading dock sealed with rusted chains. This had once been the heart of Brooklyn's shipping industry. Now it served as a tomb for abandoned dreams and criminal enterprises. Emily had studied the building's blueprints for 2 hours before making her move. She knew the Crimson Wolves had chosen this location specifically because it had multiple escape routes and no neighboring buildings. They thought isolation meant safety. They were about to learn otherwise. The gang had made one critical error. They had underestimated who they were dealing with. Emily Vance didn't just rescue hostages. She eliminated threats, permanently. Her earpiece crackled with static as her handler's voice cut through the silence. "Package is confirmed on site," Gabriel Rodriguez whispered from the mobile command unit, parked 6 blocks away. "4 hostiles detected. You are cleared for extraction by any means necessary." Emily touched her throat mic twice in acknowledgement. She had trained for scenarios like this at Quantico, in the mountains of Virginia, and in the deserts of Nevada. But training never captured the weight of real fear in a child's voice, never prepared you for the moment when someone's entire future balanced on your next decision. Emily's tactical gear was minimal but lethal. 2 Glock 19s strapped to her thighs, a ceramic knife tucked against her spine, flashbang grenades clipped to her vest, and 40 feet of military-grade rope that had just delivered her into the heart of enemy territory. She moved through the shadows like liquid darkness, her years of training compressed into fluid motion. The first guard never saw her coming. Emily's knife found the space between his ribs with surgical precision. He dropped without a sound, his AK-47 clattering uselessly to the concrete. The second guard was smoking by the east window when Emily's arm wrapped around his throat. 15 seconds later, he joined his partner in unconsciousness. Emily didn't kill unless absolutely necessary. Tonight, unconscious would suffice. The third guard presented more of a challenge. He was positioned with a clear view of the boy, his finger hovering over the trigger of a sawed-off shotgun. Emily counted his breathing pattern, 7 seconds in, 3 seconds out. On his next exhale, she moved. The flashbang grenade detonated with the force of a small sun. The warehouse erupted in blinding white light and deafening sound. Emily was already in motion, her tactical goggles protecting her from the disorientation that sent the guard stumbling into a support beam. By the time his vision cleared, Emily had him zip-tied and unconscious. That left one guard, the leader, and he was standing directly behind the boy with a 9mm pistol pressed against the child's skull. This was the moment that separated amateurs from professionals. Emily had faced similar situations in Kandahar, in Bogota, and in the back alleys of Prague. The key wasn't speed or strength, it was psychology, intimidation, the illusion of control. "You've got 30 seconds to walk away," the gang leader shouted, his voice cracking with the strain of maintaining authority he'd already lost. "After that, the kid dies." Emily stepped into the circle of light cast by the warehouse's single working bulb. She moved with deliberate calm, her hands visible but ready. Her dark hair was pulled back in a tactical braid. Her face carried the kind of focused intensity that came from years of dancing with death and always leading. "I'm Agent Emily Vance, CIA," she said, her voice carrying across the warehouse with absolute authority. "You've kidnapped the wrong child from the wrong family on the wrong night. Your 3 friends are already down. You're alone, outgunned, and completely out of options." The gang leader's hand trembled slightly against the boy's neck. Emily noticed the detail and filed it away. Fear made people unpredictable, but it also made them weak. "Who said anything about the wrong family?" the man spat. "This kid's worth millions. His daddy runs half the crime families in New York." Emily's blood turned to ice in her veins. Crime families in New York. She studied the boy's face more carefully, noting the expensive clothes, the designer shoes, the kind of quiet dignity that came from being raised with power and privilege. This wasn't some random kidnapping victim. This was connected to the very organizations she had spent years infiltrating. "What's your name, sweetheart?" Emily asked the boy, keeping her voice gentle while her mind raced through possibilities. "Marco," the child whispered, his dark eyes never leaving Emily's face. "Marco Moretti." The name hit Emily like a physical blow. Moretti, as in Lorenzo Moretti, also known as the Wolf. The same Lorenzo Moretti who controlled shipping, gambling, and construction throughout the 5 boroughs. The same Lorenzo Moretti whose organization Emily had been trying to penetrate for 18 months without success. The same Lorenzo Moretti who had remained completely untouchable despite the FBI's best efforts to find a single crack in his armor. And now, his 8-year-old son was staring at her with the kind of trust that could either make her career or destroy everything she had worked for. Emily's training kicked in, overriding the complications that were already forming in her mind. Mission first, consequences later. She took another step forward, closing the distance between herself and the gang leader. "You made one mistake tonight," she told him, her voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried more menace than any shout. "You assumed this was about money." The man's eyes darted nervously between Emily and the exits he could no longer reach. His grip on the pistol was growing slippery with sweat. "It is about money. $10 million. That's what his family will pay to get him back alive." Emily smiled, and there was nothing warm about the expression. $10 million, she repeated thoughtfully. "Do you know what Lorenzo Moretti did to the last people who threatened his family?" The gang leader's face went pale. Emily continued, her voice taking on the tone of someone sharing an interesting historical fact. 3 years ago, someone tried to extort money from the Moretti organization by threatening his business interests. They didn't even touch his family, just his business. The authorities found pieces of them scattered across 4 different boroughs. It took dental records to identify the remains. "Tonight, you didn't just threaten his business," Emily continued. "You put your hands on his son. You made that little boy cry for help in a dark warehouse. You tied him to a chair and pressed a gun to his head." Emily's voice grew softer with each word, more intimate, more terrifying. "Do you know what happened to Miguel Santos 2 years ago? He tried to use Lorenzo's nephew as leverage. They never found enough of him to fill a coffee cup. How long do you think it will take Lorenzo Moretti to find you after I tell him exactly who was responsible for his son's kidnapping?" The gang leader's resolve was crumbling. Emily could see it in his eyes, in the way his breathing had become shallow and rapid. He had thought he was predator. He was learning he had always been prey. "But Lorenzo Moretti doesn't even know I exist," the man stammered. Emily's smile widened. "He will after tonight, because I'm going to tell him myself, personally." The implication hung in the air like poison. Emily was law enforcement. But she was also offering to betray her own mission for the sake of a child's safety. The gang leader couldn't know that this was all psychological manipulation, that Emily would never actually compromise an ongoing investigation. All he knew was that his plan had gone from simple kidnapping to potential death sentence in the span of 5 minutes. "What do you want?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Emily gestured toward the boy. "Untie him. Now, step away from the chair. Keep your gun pointed at the floor. Do exactly what I say, and you might live long enough to regret tonight." The man's hands shook as he fumbled with the ropes binding Marco to the chair. Emily watched every movement, calculating angles and distances. She could have taken the shot at any point, but that would have traumatized the boy even further. Sometimes the harder path was also the right path. Marco rubbed his wrists where the rope had chafed his skin, but his eyes remained fixed on Emily. There was something in his gaze that reminded her of pictures she had seen of his father. Intelligence, strength, the kind of quiet assessment that came from being raised in a world where trust was currency and betrayal was death. "Are you really FBI?" Marco asked, his voice stronger now that he was free. "CIA," Emily corrected gently. "And yes, I'm really here to get you home safely." The gang leader had backed away from the chair, his gun now pointed at the concrete floor. His bravado had evaporated completely, replaced by the stark realization that he had made an enemy of one of the most dangerous families in America. Emily moved with practiced efficiency. She zip-tied the gang leader's hands behind his back, secured his weapon, and called for backup using her encrypted radio. Within minutes, the warehouse would be swarming with federal agents. Marco would be reunited with his family. The Crimson Wolves would spend the rest of their lives in federal prison. It should have been a perfect ending to a successful mission. But as Emily knelt beside Marco, checking him for injuries, she realized that this night was just the beginning of something far more complicated. "You're very brave," she told him, her voice gentle as she examined the cut on his forehead. "It's superficial. You're going to be fine." Marco nodded solemnly. "My papa always said that brave people help others, even when it's dangerous." Emily's heart clenched at the boy's words. In her world, Lorenzo Moretti was a target, a criminal to be brought to justice. In Marco's world, he was simply Papa, the man who taught his son about courage and helping others. The disconnect was jarring, forcing Emily to confront the reality that the people she hunted were also human beings with families, children, and complex motivations. The sound of sirens grew louder as federal backup approached the warehouse. Emily's earpiece crackled with Gabriel's voice. "Package is secure. Excellent work, Agent Vance. Cleanup crew is 2 minutes out." Emily touched her throat mic in acknowledgement, but her attention remained focused on Marco. The boy was studying her face with the kind of intensity that suggested he was memorizing every detail. He's going to remember this night for the rest of his life, Emily realized, and somehow that thought carried more weight than any mission debrief or performance evaluation. As the federal agents swarmed into the warehouse, Emily found herself making a decision that would have consequences far beyond this single mission. Instead of disappearing into the night as protocol demanded, she stayed with Marco until his family arrived. She wanted to see Lorenzo Moretti in person, to understand the man behind the criminal reputation. But more than that, she wanted to make sure Marco felt safe, that his rescue hadn't been just another government operation, but a genuine act of human compassion. 20 minutes later, the warehouse doors burst open with such force they seemed to shake the entire building. Lorenzo Moretti entered like a force of nature, his presence filling the vast space with an intensity that made every federal agent step back instinctively. He was exactly what Emily had expected, and nothing like she had imagined. Tall, broad-shouldered, with silver threading through dark hair that spoke of wisdom earned through experience rather than age. His face carried the kind of controlled fury that suggested volumes of violence held in check by sheer will. But when his eyes found Marco, all of that dangerous energy transformed into something else entirely. Relief. Love. Pure, devastating parental fear finally given permission to breathe. "Papa!" Marco called out, his voice cracking with emotion as he ran toward his father. Lorenzo dropped to one knee, gathering his son into his arms with the kind of desperate gentleness that spoke of a man who had just faced his worst nightmare. Emily watched the reunion from across the warehouse, noting how Lorenzo's hands shook as he checked Marco for injuries, how he whispered words of comfort in rapid Italian, how he held his son as if he might disappear at any moment. This was not the cold, calculating crime boss she had been studying for 18 months. This was a father who had just gotten his child back from the brink of death. The complexity of the moment wasn't lost on Emily. She was supposed to be gathering intelligence on Lorenzo Moretti, looking for weaknesses in his organization. Instead, she found herself witnessing his greatest strength. The love he had for his son was absolute, unconditional, and utterly vulnerable. It was also the kind of weakness that could destroy empires if exploited by the right enemy. Lorenzo's eyes found Emily across the warehouse. For a moment, their gazes locked, and Emily felt the full weight of his assessment. He was studying her with the same intensity she had been using to study him. Two professionals recognizing each other across a crowded room. "She's the one who saved me, Papa," Marco said, his voice carrying clearly in the warehouse silence. "She came down from the ceiling like an angel and made the bad men go away." Lorenzo stood slowly, his hand never leaving Marco's shoulder. He crossed the warehouse with measured steps, each footfall echoing like a heartbeat in the vast space. When he stopped in front of Emily, she could see the conflict in his eyes. Gratitude warring with suspicion, recognition warring with caution. "Agent Emily Vance," Lorenzo said, his voice carrying the kind of quiet authority that made grown men reconsider their life choices. "CIA." Emily nodded, unsure how he knew her name and agency. Information traveled fast in his world, probably faster than in hers. "Thank you," he continued, the words simple but weighted with meaning that went far beyond their surface. "For bringing my son home, for keeping him safe, for giving me the chance to hold him again." Emily found herself studying Lorenzo's face, noting the lines around his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and impossible decisions. The calluses on his hands that suggested he had earned his position through more than just inherited power. The way he touched Marco's hair with infinite tenderness, even while maintaining perfect awareness of every federal agent in the warehouse. "I was doing my job," Emily replied, the words feeling insufficient, even as she spoke them. Lorenzo's eyes held hers for a moment longer than was comfortable. "No," he said quietly, "you were saving my son. There's a difference." The distinction hung in the air between them, loaded with implications neither could fully acknowledge in present company. Emily was acutely aware that every word, every gesture was being recorded by surveillance equipment and noted by her fellow agents. But she was also aware of something else, something that had nothing to do with missions or objectives or professional advancement. She was looking into the eyes of a man who had just experienced every parent's worst nightmare and emerged with his most precious treasure intact. The gratitude in his voice was real, the relief in his posture was genuine, and the way he held his son suggested depths of humanity that her intelligence files had never captured. "How did you find us so quickly?" Lorenzo asked, his tone conversational, but his eyes alert for any detail that might prove useful later. Emily hesitated. Standard procedure would be to deflect, to reveal nothing about investigative techniques or intelligence sources. But something about this moment felt different, more honest, more human. "We'd been tracking the Crimson Wolves for 72 hours, she said. "They made the mistake of using their cell phones to coordinate the kidnapping. We followed the digital trail here." Lorenzo nodded slowly, filing away information that would undoubtedly influence how he conducted business in the future. But Emily found she didn't care about the intelligence implications. She was more focused on the fact that Marco was safe, that this particular nightmare was over. "I owe you a debt, Agent Vance," Lorenzo said, his voice taking on a formal quality that suggested this wasn't just gratitude, but a promise. "In my world, such debts are not taken lightly." Emily started to protest, to fall back on professional protocols about law enforcement officers, not accepting rewards or favors from subjects under investigation. But Lorenzo held up a hand, stopping her words before they could form. "This isn't about your world or mine," he said quietly. "This is about a father who has his son back because one woman was brave enough to rappel through a skylight into a warehouse full of armed criminals. That deserves recognition that transcends politics or law enforcement. The federal cleanup crew was wrapping up their work, cataloging evidence, processing the unconscious gang members, and preparing reports that would keep prosecutors busy for months. Emily's handler approached, his expression suggesting it was time for her to disengage from the scene. "Agent Vance," Gabriel said formally, recognizing the need to maintain protocol despite the emotional undercurrents of the moment. "We need to proceed to debriefing." Emily nodded, understanding that her mission was officially complete. But as she turned to leave, Marco broke free from his father's protective grip and ran toward her. Before Emily could react, the 8-year-old had wrapped his arms around her waist in a fierce hug that spoke of pure, uncomplicated gratitude. "Thank you," he whispered against her tactical vest. "Thank you for coming to save me when I was scared." Emily knelt down to Marco's level, her professional composure cracking slightly in the face of such genuine innocence. "You're very brave, Marco," she told him, her voice softer than she had intended. "And you're going to grow up to be an amazing man, just like your papa." The words were out of her mouth before she could stop them, a moment of honesty that her training had never prepared her for. She was supposed to see Lorenzo Moretti as a criminal, a target, an objective to be achieved. Instead, she found herself acknowledging him as a father who loved his son completely and without reservation. Lorenzo watched the exchange with an expression Emily couldn't quite read. When Marco finally released her and returned to his father's side, Lorenzo extended his hand to Emily. She shook it, noting the calluses, the strength, the way he held her gaze as if making a mental photograph to remember this moment. "Until we meet again, Agent Vance," he said, and there was something in his tone that suggested such a meeting was inevitable rather than merely possible. Emily nodded, unsure how to respond to what felt less like a farewell and more like a promise. She watched as Lorenzo and Marco left the warehouse together, the boy's hand trustingly placed in his father's, their voices mixing in quiet Italian conversation as they disappeared into the night. As the federal cars pulled away from the warehouse, Emily found herself staring out the window at the lights of Brooklyn flowing past in the darkness, like a river of jeweled stars. The mission had been a complete success by every measurable standard that mattered to her superiors. The hostage was safe, the criminals were captured, and her performance had been flawless according to every metric the agency used to evaluate field operations. But something fundamental had changed during those 20 minutes in the warehouse, some shift in her understanding that went deeper than mission parameters or performance evaluations. Gabriel's voice interrupted her thoughts, cutting through her contemplation with the enthusiasm of a superior officer who saw career advancement opportunities in successful operations. "Outstanding work tonight, Emily," he said, his tone carrying the weight of official approval. "The director is personally reviewing your performance report. This could mean significant advancement opportunities, possibly a promotion to senior field status, maybe even a chance to lead your own operations team." Emily nodded absently, making the appropriate responses while her mind remained elsewhere, processing implications that had nothing to do with career advancement. She was thinking about the way Lorenzo had held his son with desperate gentleness that spoke of a man who understood exactly how close he had come to losing everything that mattered. The genuine fear she had seen in his eyes when he first entered the warehouse, the kind of raw terror that no amount of criminal sophistication could disguise. The gratitude that had transcended their professional antagonism, creating a moment of human connection that existed outside the boundaries of law enforcement and organized crime. She was thinking about Marco's trust, his innocent faith that someone would come to save him when everything seemed hopeless. The way he had looked at her with complete confidence that she would keep him safe, as if her mere presence was enough to banish all the monsters from his 8-year-old world. And she was thinking about the debt that Lorenzo claimed to owe her, the promise in his voice when he said they would meet again, the certainty that suggested he already had plans forming in that calculating mind of his. 3 days later, Emily received an assignment that would change everything she thought she knew about the direction of her career and the nature of justice itself. Her handler called her into a secure conference room at Federal Plaza, his expression carrying the weight of classified information and political implications that extended far beyond a single criminal family. The room was sterile and windowless. designed to prevent electronic surveillance while ensuring that every conversation was recorded by the agency's own monitoring systems. "We have an unprecedented opportunity," Gabriel announced, with the tone of someone delivering news that could reshape entire investigations, sliding a thick file across the polished conference table toward her. "Lorenzo Moretti is looking for a new head of security for his family operations, someone with federal training, tactical experience, and an impeccable reputation for protecting high-value assets. Someone he can trust implicitly based on demonstrated actions rather than questionable references or suspicious credentials." Emily's blood ran cold as she realized what he was suggesting, understanding immediately that this wasn't just another assignment, but a complete transformation of her professional identity. "You want me to infiltrate his organization," she said, the words coming out more as statement than question, because the implications were obvious once you understood the chess moves being played at levels far above her current clearance. Gabriel nodded with the satisfaction of someone who had been planning this operation for months, waiting for exactly the right opportunity to present itself. "It's the chance we've been waiting for," he explained, his enthusiasm barely contained despite his professional demeanor. 18 months of trying to get someone inside the Moretti family organization, and now he's practically offering you a position based on nothing more than your heroic actions. The rescue operation gave you credibility that money can't buy and cover stories can't fabricate. He trusts you, Agent Vance. That trust is worth more than any intelligence we could gather through traditional surveillance." Emily stared at the file without opening it immediately, understanding that this moment would define the rest of her career and potentially the rest of her life. Everything she had worked for, every sacrifice she had made, every risk she had taken led to this opportunity sitting in front of her, wrapped in official paperwork and classified authorizations. But it also meant betraying the trust of a man who had looked her in the eyes and acknowledged a debt. It meant deceiving a child who had hugged her with pure gratitude. It meant becoming someone else entirely, someone who could look Lorenzo Moretti in the face every day and pretend to protect his family while actually gathering evidence to destroy everything he had built. The irony wasn't lost on her as she contemplated the twisted nature of the assignment. She had saved his son, performed an act of genuine heroism that had nothing to do with ulterior motives or long-term strategic planning, and now she was being asked to use that act of heroism as the foundation for his downfall. Gabriel was right about the opportunity being unprecedented. Criminal organizations like the Morettis were notoriously difficult to penetrate from the outside. They relied on generational loyalty, family connections, and personal relationships that took decades to develop. But Emily had accidentally achieved in one night what other agents spent years trying to accomplish. As Emily finally opened the file and began reading about her new identity, her carefully constructed background story, and her mission objectives that extended far beyond simple intelligence gathering, she realized that sometimes the most dangerous operations weren't the ones conducted in warehouses full of armed criminals or foreign countries hostile to American interests. Sometimes the most dangerous operations were the ones conducted in the warm comfort of a family home, where trust was offered freely and betrayal cut deeper than any physical weapon ever could. The file contained everything she needed to become someone else completely. Elena Rodriguez, former Marine Corps military police officer, discharged honorably after serving 3 tours in Afghanistan. Specialized training in personal protection, tactical operations and security systems. Extensive experience protecting high-value targets in hostile environments. Recently relocated to New York after completing a private security contract in Los Angeles. No family ties, no romantic entanglements, no connections that could compromise her cover identity or create conflicts of loyalty. The legend was perfect, professionally crafted by experts who understood how to create identities that could withstand investigation by suspicious criminals with resources that rivaled government agencies. But as Emily read through the details of her new life, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was preparing to cross a line that would fundamentally change who she was as a person. This wasn't just about gathering intelligence or building a case that would stand up in federal court. This was about becoming part of a family, earning their trust, protecting their secrets, and then using all of that intimacy to destroy them. The game was about to begin, and for the first time in her career, Agent Emily Vance wasn't entirely sure which side she wanted to win. The side of justice and law enforcement and everything she had dedicated her professional life to achieving, or the side of a father who loved his son completely, who had shown her depths of humanity that challenged every assumption she had made about the nature of good and evil. As she closed the file and looked up at Gabriel's expectant face, Emily realized that some victories came at a cost that couldn't be measured in arrests or convictions or career advancement. Sometimes the price of success was the very soul of the person achieving it. She thought about Marco's innocent smile, Lorenzo's grateful handshake, and the promise of a debt that would soon become the foundation of the most complex deception of her career. The rescue that had begun as a simple mission to save a kidnapped child had evolved into something far more dangerous, a game of trust and betrayal that would test everything she believed about duty, justice, and the thin line between right and wrong in a world where good people sometimes did terrible things for the right reasons. Thanks for watching, and remember to subscribe for more incredible true stories that prove sometimes the most dangerous missions aren't the ones you see coming.